This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, everybody? Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And we are back for another edition of the Primetime Podcast here on Most Valuable Podcast, where we love talking about college sports, mainly football and basketball. Brandon, this is not the only podcast that we're doing this week. We're double dipping. We're double dipping here on the Primetime Podcast because we've got a lot of things going on this week, or a lot of things happened over the weekend that we got to kind of dissect. We've got playoff news that we got to go through, situations we have to go through, and then we've got coaching. So what we're going to do, we're just letting you guys know, this will be our normal podcast. This will be all playoff topics. We'll do our picks at the end, but then there will be an additional podcast on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, Stitcher, on TuneIn, I believe we're in now. Wherever you listen to podcasts, there will now be two. If you're on YouTube, they're just coming out in segments. They just get thrown at you, and you're like, oh, cool, Primetime Podcast. I go and listen to it. So for you, it's just the segments, because I don't know how I'm going to throw the segments out, because some are more time-sensitive than others. But before we get into it, gotta do what I always do. A little bit of housekeeping, not house cleaning. Housekeeping here on the podcast. Number one, if you have not already, check out patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast. That link is down below in the description. You like what we're doing here, you want to help us out more so than liking, sharing, watching our videos. $10, you could be on a podcast with us each and every month talking about whatever college topic you would like to talk about each month. You can also be on any of the podcasts here on Most Valuable Podcasts. Then also go on to iTunes. If you have an iTunes account, you listen to us on iTunes, go ahead, give us that 5-star rating, then do the same for the Onside Kick, Rick and Johnny podcast, and the Fast Break. We would really, really appreciate it. But Brandon, housekeeping is over. We got to get right into this. And the first topic I want to hit is one that is very near and dear, because Andrew, I believe it was Andrew, no, it was Trent Moran, I believe, on Twitter, brought up something that I completely forgot about when we talked about Auburn and Georgia. Auburn's one win away from Mr. Brandon Swanson going streaking in the streets tonight. I believe it was hide your kids, hide your wife, because Brandon Swanson's going streaking tonight. I added the tonight. It just sounds a little better. But, yeah, like, you didn't think this was going to happen, did you, big guy?
No, that's why I said it. That's why I said it. I didn't think it was possible with the role that Georgia was going on, with how good Alabama had been, and, you know, whether they were good beating ranked teams or non-ranked teams, they were rolling over them. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just look at the scores of those Alabama games, look at those scores of those Georgia games, and then you look at an Auburn team that I think that even Auburn fans, I think it'd be safe to say they started off slow this season, but they have really kicked it into the highest gear right now, and they've been rolling. So right now they're a very dangerous team. I would say that they're the most dangerous team in all of college football right now. That's the one team I would not want to play. And it is looking more and more likely that they will be getting a win against Georgia. And I don't want to count Georgia out in any means.
Also don't want to give away your pick.
No,
we're going to be picking that later in the podcast.
I'm just saying right now that's what it's looking like. But if they do that, I don't know. I think I'll just go into hiding for a little bit.
It's also like, and I know that people don't like that I bring them up. It's like Paul Feinbaum said here on the Dan Patrick Show. He goes, well, you know, I give Georgia the favorite right now, but ask me at 2 o'clock, it'd be different. Like, ask Brant at the end of the podcast. He'll pick Georgia to beat Auburn, but I want to apologize. It was Tyler Moran. I thought it was either Trent or Tyler. Tyler Moran was the one that brought up the streaking, and then it was Andrew. We love you, Andrew, talking about them Clemson Tigers. But the reason why I bring up the streaking in the streets in Auburn is because let's focus on Alabama for a second. I know Auburn's like, well, but we won the game. Shouldn't you be focusing on us? The thing that's interesting about this is the situation that this loss has created for the Crimson Tide, because they're a one-loss team. However, depending on how things play out this upcoming week, they could be left out of the playoff. Because you think about it, Clemson or Miami, winner of that game is in. Auburn and Georgia, we would assume that the winner of that game is in, or could Auburn be this year's Penn State where they go ahead and win, but the committee keeps them out? I think that's ludicrous because they have beaten 2 number 1 teams en route to then that hypothetical SEC championship right now. Then it all depends on what happens in the Big Ten and the Big 12. I'm going to ask you, Brandon, is there a chance, any chance, that Alabama, were they eliminated from playoff contention this week, or are they still alive?
I think that there is still hope for the Alabama Crimson Tide, but they need very specific situations to occur. And for that to happen, you have to look at the Big Ten title game. You have to look at the Big 12 title game. And those I think, are going to be 2 of the biggest ones for Alabama this upcoming weekend. That's where Wisconsin will play Ohio State. Wisconsin, we'll talk about them later, has not had much success against Ohio State in the past. And then on the other side, with the Big 12, you've got Oklahoma and TCU. And this game, which is a game that I think we both actually thought it was going to be closer the first time, and Oklahoma essentially blew TCU out in that one, where I thought, and you did as well, that TCU's defense would come to play, hold down Oklahoma a little bit. But what
I thought TCU would win.
What Oklahoma has done is they've had pretty good defense. They've been the team in the Big 12 that has had an electric offense and a defense that has really held down a whole lot of teams. And I think one of those, going all the way back to the Ohio State game, only allowing 16 points to a very high-flying Ohio State offense that can put up a lot of points at any time. That is why they're here right now. That's why Oklahoma has been so good. That's why they were able to get past, they were able to get past an Oklahoma State because Oklahoma State's defense was non-existent. They were able to get past a TCU because, as good as TCU's defense is and was, Oklahoma's offense was just better. And then defensively, they were able to hold against TCU. But those are the 2 big matchups, I think. Wisconsin and Ohio State, and TCU and Oklahoma. If one of those teams is to lose, let's say, for instance, if Ohio State,
it's like, which way do you want to go?
And I think you have to go the way of Ohio State. If Ohio State is to win, they've won then a conference championship game, but they would have 2 losses. And they would have won then a conference championship game against Wisconsin, who was 12-0 on the year, but then would the committee say, well, their strength of schedule wasn't that great. But then could a committee member come in and say, well, Alabama's 11-1, but their strength of schedule wasn't that great. With I think the 2 toughest games on their schedule were Mississippi State and Louisiana State.
Yeah.
Rating as the best games in terms of toughness-wise on Alabama's schedule. So even if Ohio State wins, it could still be interesting because at that point, you would have the debate of strength of schedule, losses, and then a conference championship win. All those things would come into play on that.
Well, and the thing that I was thinking about is, let's say in scenario 1, let's say ACC, SEC, because it doesn't matter who wins those games, the winner is in. Let's say in the scenario that you were painting out, let's say Oklahoma wins and Ohio State wins. Because
in my scenario, it would be Ohio State and TCU.
Oh, I'll get to that then. Let's go Oklahoma.
Let's go with yours.
We'll go Ohio and Oklahoma, because to me, if Oklahoma wins, they're in. So then you would have ACC, SEC, Oklahoma, and then the final, and that's not an exact representation. Put those 3 in any order that you would want, but that for that 4th spot, to me, it would come down to Big Ten champion of the Ohio State Buckeyes or Alabama. And how I would look at it, not the committee, how I would look at it is, yes, you lost to Oklahoma, and I know everyone's going to say you got blown out by Oklahoma, but I would look at that loss and go, that's still a good loss because virtually you lost to a playoff team. Now, let's say they blow out Wisconsin. Those would cancel each other out. You got blown out by a playoff team. You blew out a team that is a playoff team right now or close to a playoff team right now. They're in the hunt for that playoff. You also have beaten a number 2 team in Penn State, and you've beaten Michigan State. Yes, I know you lost to Iowa, but that one was on the road, whereas Alabama, it's kind of hard for me to pick Alabama over Ohio State if they win against Wisconsin, because yes, I know they lost to Oklahoma, but the Penn State win and the Wisconsin win would show to me, more so the Wisconsin win, if anything, because of where it's happening. I would look at it and go, the Ohio State has played playoff caliber teams, they're 2-1. Alabama has played one playoff caliber team, they're 0-1. I'm going with the Buckeyes. However, if it was your situation, and this is the situation that I'm kind of hoping for, because if TCU and Ohio State win, all chaos breaks loose. All chaos. ACC, SEC. At that point, Ohio State's in to me. Like, if Oklahoma loses, Ohio State's in, because I think that getting the win over Wisconsin edges them out over a Wisconsin team. Then to me, it becomes, and we're going to talk about one of these teams in the next segment, then that final spot becomes, is it Alabama's spot? Is it Wisconsin's spot? Is it TCU's spot? Or if the Pac-12 champion is the Trojans, a far out one, and we'll get to that one a little bit later, but I'm going to mention them because they'd be in the conversation of the Trojans as well. It would then become that 4 team of Wisconsin, TCU, Alabama, and the Trojans. Which one are you putting in there? That's what it would become, and it would be absolute chaos, and I wouldn't be able to, in 30 minutes, I wouldn't be able to make a decision. That may take me a week to go through all those resumes.
Yeah, there is so much that could happen from the outcomes of those games. Mm-hmm. I think that one thing that could make it easier is that if you move over to the SEC championship game, mm-hmm. and if Georgia wins that game, I don't know. I think that's where it's going to be a little bit more interesting. If I'm honestly trying to think about it. If Auburn wins that game, mm-hmm. Auburn is in. Auburn is in. If Georgia wins, mm-hmm. then are they most likely in? Auburn is kicked to the side, and Alabama's kicked to the side. That would be then 3 losses for Auburn, mm-hmm. and that would put Georgia at what? 11, 12-1? And
depends on how. I'm going to ask you, if Georgia wins against Auburn, is it close or is it a blowout?
Let's say it's a close game. It was a blowout last time. It's a close game this time.
This is not going to. I'm not sure if many people are going to be on board with me in my thinking here, but in this situation, Oklahoma loses, so TCU wins, Ohio State wins, and Georgia wins. Doesn't matter what happens in the ACC at this point. If those 3 things happen, TCU, Ohio State, and Georgia win close, like I'm talking 3-point game, three or less point game in that SEC championship game, I would almost be inclined to go the ACC champion, Georgia, Ohio State, and then Auburn at 4. I would almost be inclined to, at that point, say Auburn at 4 because, yes, it was a rematch, but you beat Georgia before when they were number 1, and you've beaten 2 number 1s. Like, the thing with Auburn that's going to play into this, and this is what's going to play in with Alabama, and they're exactly flipped, is Alabama will have the better strength of record, the better SOR. But Auburn's going to have the better strength of schedule. They beat better teams.
And Auburn already beat Alabama.
And they already beat the head-to-head matchup, too. So I would be inclined to, if Ohio State and TCU win and Georgia wins close, kind of like a Kurt Herbstreit thing here, I don't care that Auburn lost 3 games. They're one of the top 4 teams in my mind looking at the eye test, and I put them in at number 4. I would almost be inclined to do that because they've beaten two I'm going to say world beaters because they're number one team in the nation, two top dogs in as many weeks. It was, 3 weeks? In 3 weeks, they knocked off two number ones. So if the game was close, I would almost be inclined to put Auburn at number 4 and have two SEC teams in there.
And then what happens if then for the ACC championship game, Clemson loses, then Miami's in, Clemson's out with their two losses of a Syracuse loss, the Miami loss. They're most likely out. If Ohio State, to me, they're most likely out because if you're looking, they lose, TCU wins. And Ohio State wins, and gosh, it's almost so confusing. I can't keep it all together in my head.
Head hurts.
I'll be honest with you.
I
really can't keep it together because I'm trying to play these all out in my head as we're doing this right now. So let's say TCU wins. Let's say that.
Let's just get out the spreadsheets.
No kidding. TCU wins. Ohio State wins. Georgia wins.
Close.
And Miami wins. That puts Miami in. That puts Georgia in. That could very well put Ohio State in, and then I think that if you're going with an eye test. If you're going with an eye test, I think it would be Auburn. I think right now at this point, just because of Auburn blew out Georgia. Auburn beat closely 12 points Alabama, the number one team in the country. Alabama, seemingly, it feels like they haven't lost in 2 years. Of course, they lost the national championship game this past year, but it feels like they have not lost in forever. I personally think no matter what else happens, no matter what scenario you want to give it for any other team, Big 12, Big 10, anything like that, Auburn deserves to be in whether they win or they lose. I personally think if you want to go on an eye test, you want to go by a team that has played some of the best football, especially down here down the stretch run. I would have done the same thing last year. I think Penn State should have been in last year, and I think they got snubbed. I think Auburn should be in right now this year. Again, I don't care as long as they.
Let me throw a scenario out.
Let me just say one final point. As long as if they were to lose against Georgia, as long as they didn't lose badly, as long as it was a very, very close game, I think that Auburn should still be in. I do. I think that they've been a team that has played the best football. You can't. How would it be if you beat a number one team and then 2 weeks later beat another number one team and you don't make it in? To me, that doesn't make any sense. And it's not like you beat them on luck. You beat them because you're a good team.
Let me throw this out at you. Let's say Miami or Clemson, pick your one, whichever one, because I really think that one is win and you're in. Miami,
the
Clemson,
ACC. I think the ACC. That's the easiest
that's the main one. You win that game, you're in the playoff. And let's say this situation goes down. Let's say Miami or Clemson put the slash there. Winner of that is in. Let's say Oklahoma wins, Wisconsin wins. That means to me, in my mind, the ACC, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin would all be in. I wouldn't be excited about Wisconsin, but I would say, you know what? Ohio State, I've always seen them as a playoff caliber team. When we talked about which 2-loss teams could play themselves back in, I was very high on Ohio State. You were not. So I would look at that and go, you know what? I got to respect that because I've respected the Buckeyes all year, which is weird because in years past, I've been all over Michigan and not all over the Buckeyes. I've liked Harbaugh in the blue rather than my favorite color in red. I want to throw this out, though. Let's say Clemson, Miami, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Georgia wins close. Does the committee do what they did last year and say, hey, you know what? Last year, Penn State won the conference championship. They didn't get in. Ohio State was. Do they go, yeah, Georgia, you beat Auburn, but Auburn's still the better team. We're putting them in over you, although you have the conference championship.
I think that would
Do they have the balls to do that?
No, they don't. We know the committee barely has the ball. They probably are questioning right now whether or not they have the balls to put in a 2-loss team. There's
let alone a 3-loss
There's
team.
literally no way that they put in a 3-loss team. Not at all. I mean, they're going to have to do a lot of things this year that they don't want to do because there's so much uptight. Like, oh my gosh, we need to have everyone in there who has 1 loss or 0 losses. If that happened, we'd be choosing people outside of the Power 5.
We'd be, Central Florida.
Yeah.
My boys, my Golden Knights would be in.
Yeah. And that's
Scotty
why,
Frost.
And that's why we don't do that. But because we want to see good games. But
Hey, we put in the big boys and we get blowouts in the first games.
I know, you're right.
Remember 38-0, 31-0. Remember We Want Bama from Washington? Hey, Huskies, how'd that work out? I know Sean is still crying in a corner.
So many of these teams. I mean, even Clemson against Oklahoma a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, I think it was a complete blowout. Second half.
The only team that wants Bama, there's 2 of them, and they're both Tigers, Clemson and Auburn. They're the only ones in my lifetime that, like, consistently, it's like, oh, that's in recent history, that's the 2 schools that can beat Alabama. Maybe LSU back in the day when they were, and I say back in the day, like late 2000s, could also beat Alabama. But not a lot of teams could.
You know, Ricky, we play these different games.
I love it.
We play these conference championship games. But why should it be? And it is. I mean, it is. I'm asking an almost stupid question.
Okay.
But why shouldn't it just be based off of, one, a feel of who we just believe is the best team? No matter how many losses within reason, 2 to 3, I would say, is the very most. But that have just played the best all season long. Like, if you look at the best team all throughout this season, it's Auburn. In my mind, it's Auburn. And yes, they lost to Clemson early on. What was it? 14-3, 14-6. Something very low scoring where Auburn really wasn't able to get any scoring going. Clemson, quite honestly, even with a couple of touchdowns, wasn't able to get much going. It was early on in the season.
Wasn't Kelly Bryant injured in that game too?
I think
came
for a
out
brief
of that
moment,
game,
but he was back in pretty quickly. But it seemed like ever since then, for the most part, Auburn has just roared right along. And when you beat, in 3 weeks, you beat the number 1 ranked team at the time twice out of 3 weeks. And it's not like it was 1-point games or 3-point games. You blew out Georgia 40-17. You beat Alabama 26-14. Auburn, in my mind, Ricky, they are the number 1 team right now in college football. They just are. They just are. And you can dispute that, and I know many will. But right now, they are the best.
Because they've beaten the best twice.
Because they've beaten the best 2 times in the same season in 3 weeks. You cannot take things away from Auburn. You just can't do it. It doesn't matter that they have 2 losses. All right. As many people would say, it doesn't matter that Wisconsin has lost to nobody. They've beaten nobody. That's what people would say. So it doesn't matter. Does 12-0 make you the best team? It doesn't. Does 11-1 make you the best team? It doesn't.
It's about who you play.
Does 9-2 with a tough schedule that you pretty much roared right through and beat the number 1 team 2 times? Does that make you the best team? It should.
Well, and the thing that I'll kind of ask to wrap this all up, because we've been going for quite some time, is bringing this back to Alabama before we move on to the Pac-12 and then some. With Alabama, the question, were they eliminated from the playoffs this past weekend? I think the greater question, if they do miss the playoff, will come back to Nick Saban and his scheduling. I heard today on many of the sports talk shows where they're like, why is he scheduling Mercer and Chattanooga and College of Charleston the week before the Iron Bowl? Like, those are the kinds of teams that Alabama plays before the Iron Bowl. And it's like, The thing I don't agree with is when people say, well, they thought that Florida State, but even Florida State wasn't a tough game. I'm like, well, they only won 24-7. And let's be completely honest. Florida State and how they played this season, to me, wasn't indicative of that team as a whole. They would have won a few more games. Would they have been a playoff team? Maybe. But they would have done a lot better if they had their quarterback all the way through, and if DeAndre Francois did not get injured in that first game against Alabama. So I don't think it's anything to knock Florida State. It's just they had a bad injury at the worst time of the year and a bad injury to their most important position to end the segment. Do you think at the end of it, because we are recording this on Monday, I forgot to say that because a lot of people are going to be like, the rankings say this. We record this before the actual rankings come out. So we're kind of going off of our personal rankings as well as what we think the committee will do. I'm going to ask you this. Do you think when everything is all said and done, we'll look back at it and say Alabama was eliminated this past weekend against Auburn?
Yeah, I do. I think we will.
I think the same.
I truly do. I think that Alabama's best chance right now is send a couple of bunt cakes over to the teams they need to win and say, please, please.
Ohio State and TCU got to get to work. But if you're on YouTube, let us know what you guys think down below because this segment's going to be ending. So let us know what you guys think about Alabama.